So since October 7, we've witnessed unbearable, unspeakable violence and really too many lives lost in Palestine, Israel, and Gaza. And we've seen communities around the world polarize and fragment over profound questions about whose lives are grievable and whose are not, and who is able to speak up and who is not able to speak up. So in the following panel, turning towards each other and not against each other, bridging in times of crisis, we really hope to open a space where we can honor each other's pain, where we find ways of bridging, despite that groups are pitted against one another right now, and explore generative forms of allyship and co-liberation. So with that, I'd love to welcome the moderator of this panel, Cecily Saraski, who's the communications director at OBI, and who's been working on a range of justice and equity issues over the past decades, including building the largest progressive Jewish grassroots organization in the United States, Jewish Voice for Peace. So welcome, Cecily.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Monica, for reminding us that we have bodies, we have breath, we have heartbeats, that we are connected to the earth and the land and this planet, and that we belong to it, and that we are connected to each other, and we belong to each other. One of the features of othering is, to paraphrase Judith Butler, because you can't have a conference like this without paraphrasing Judith Butler, is this idea of drawing a line between those who are grievable and those who are not. And so there are questions about who draws the line, or what institutions draw those lines. Are we actually drawing the lines that we find within our bodies? What is non-negotiable for us is there should be no line, ever. Everyone is grievable. Everyone belongs. Every life is precious. We are life affirming. We are life affirming in our vision of belonging for everyone. And this is an extraordinary moment in time. And I want to ask for your grace, your patience, your love and care, especially for our incredible guests. We pulled this together. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, many people in this room. We pulled this together in just a couple of days. And Yasmeen and Udi are absolutely extraordinary human beings. We are so lucky to have them in conversation. And it is really important to me because this is such an incredibly painful and emotional time in a way that reverberates, I think, for people throughout the world. We've seen fragmentation happening in our schools, in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities, because of this question in part about grievability. People might be surprised to know, I know I was, when I first started reading headlines, that Jews and Israeli Jews were moving back to Berlin about 10, 15 years ago. It was a bit of a scandal and shocking, and also kind of amazing. I mean, almost unimaginable. Folks may also be surprised to know that Berlin has one of the largest Palestinian communities outside of the Middle East. Something like 30 to 40,000 people, significantly larger even than the Jewish and Israeli community that's here. And while there are individuals who are in deep pain and grieving all throughout our communities, there's an incredible asymmetry in power and in who can demonstrate publicly their sympathy for Palestinians versus the state and how it connects to an idea of grief with Israelis. One of the things we're going to complicate, and I just want to remind people, is governments are not people. We are incredibly complex. John said something yesterday, the other is an illusion, a dangerous one, but the other is an illusion. And it's so interesting to me, and you know, in Western culture, we think in terms of these profound dualities, you know, black and white, and male and female, and tall and short, and the foundational duality that we all often refer to without even thinking about it, the unreconcilable opposition is often Israeli-Palestinian. And I hear people talk about it all the time. And in my own life, as a Jewish person, I had to make a decision about the person and the people who I was told by the culture at large and by these narratives was my other. And we know that when you project onto another, you feel fear when you encounter them, even in the mind, especially in the mind, maybe only in the mind. You feel it in your solar plexus. You feel anxiety. You feel all of these things that we're all feeling right now, especially when we're co-created by Twitter and the news and the way that it is triggering aspects of us, our own fear and manipulating that fear. I learned that the only antidote to that kind of perpetual misery, and I'd almost say loneliness. Those of us who are Jewish know we were raised, you know, the world, not all of us, but there is a sense of the world hates us. And we were raised with this idea. And when you hear that enough, you start to internalize it, right? We tell stories enough, long enough, those stories start to tell us. And it's not a fun place to be when you think that. And it also, when you are in fear, it gives permission to cause deep and profound harm as a form of defense. So I discovered there's only one antidote to that, and that is to go to who your other is. That is to go to where your fear is. That is to be in community with the people and to learn the history, to understand and accompany and find a place of shared experience, shared life, shared grief. I'm going to share 2 stories before we bring our guests on. John told a lot of stories yesterday, so I'm going to take that as permission because they are beautiful stories. The first time I went to the West Bank, I went with a Palestinian friend of mine, and there are a few of us. And we were in Ramallah for the week. And I had an extraordinary week. She just pulled out all the stops, and we met friends, people doing fascinating, amazing work. We would go, I remember going to a restaurant, like a family restaurant, where there, and those of you who are Palestinian know this, like almost like a Jeopardy game every night, and everybody comes out, and people are playing games, and there are contests, and I was so enlivened by the humans that I met. As I was leaving, I was going through the checkpoint back to Jerusalem. And there was a young soldier named Yosef. I still remember his name. And he probably was not more than 18 years old. He appeared to be Ethiopian Jewish. He looked at me and he saw my suitcase and he asked me, "Why do you have a suitcase?" I said, "Oh, I've just been in Ramallah for the week." And he looked at me and he said, Ramallah is garbage. Why are you in Ramallah? Go to Jerusalem." And in that moment, I understood there was an entire extraordinary, beautiful world right in front of him, literally 5 feet away, that he could not see, that he had been raised with such fear, that he was incapable. And it is scary. You hand an 18-year-old a gun. It is a very scary situation for human beings. And these are kids. And he could not see the world around him. And I realized we're all Yosef. We all are. We all have these profound blind spots in our lives and in our world that have been created by fear, created by the state, created by education, all kinds of things. And so to encounter each other is often the most profound thing we can do. And so the other thing I want to say is I'm an illusion. I look like one person, but actually there are many people who have co-created me. And I have had many conversations over the last few days, and our colleagues, and Basima, and Hussein, and Ramon, and Sarah, and John, many of us in deep conversation. I do want to say that there should be more people on this stage, but they do not feel safe to be on this stage. And we're going to talk about that, the political circumstances, what it means to not only be humans together, but to have a thriving democracy requires that we all be able to grieve, that we all be able to show up, but there are people both from the United States and definitely Germany who have asked that I not mention their names and who I would love to have on the stage with us, and they can't. So I want us to hold that in our hearts. I'm going to bring on our incredible folks. Yasmeen Daher, would you come on? Huge round of applause. Huge, 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 huge. And Udi Raz.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's it's bright up here.
It is bright.
It is bright.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the bios, the short bios that Yasmeen and Udi gave us, but I want to say that the thing that's most important and moving to me is not only that in just a few days' time, both of you dropped what you were doing and said, with very little preparation, this is important and it matters, and we are happy to do this. You did it with significant courage. This is an extraordinary emotional time, and so for us to even make this request of you I want to recognize that and the sacredness of that choice you've made. And I want to say you're both, Sarah and I had breakfast with you the other day, and we just fell in love with you and thought, how lucky are we to have you? So just as humans, I just want to say that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yasmeen Daher is a feminist activist and a writer. She holds a doctorate degree from the Department of Philosophy, University of Montreal, with a focus on ethics and political philosophy. She has taught previously in different institutions, including Birzeit University in Palestine and Simone de Beauvoir Institute in Canada. She is currently the co-director and editorial director of Febrer,
yes.
A network for independent Arab media organizations based in Berlin. Udi is a doctoral fellow at the Berlin Graduate School of Muslim Cultures and Societies. There, she investigates the contemporary self-understanding of Germany as a nation-state, as it emerges through public attempts to regulate encounters between Muslims and Jews. Muslims and Jews. We can talk about that. She grew up in Haifa between Tel Aviv and Beirut. Her work is shaped by local and global anti- and decolonial, as well as queer liberation movements. She has lived in Berlin since 2010, where she first studied culture and history of the Middle East, and then Islamic studies at the Free University Berlin. Raz is a board member of the Germany-based organization Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in the Middle East. All right. So the first question I just want to ask is, how have you been for these weeks? What have these weeks been like for each of you? Yasmeen, may I start with you?
Yeah. So thank you so much, Cecily. Thank you for the encouragement and also the grace and for putting this quickly together. I know that for me it was a commitment in the past few years, but definitely in the past few weeks, that whenever there's an opportunity to speak about what's happening in Palestine, I'll take it. So it's been difficult. It's been very difficult weeks. I don't think there is an unprecedented amount of hatred towards the Palestinians, especially in the media and amongst international actors. And here I would also reiterate the differentiation you made between the people and governments. So the amount, the discourse in the media against the Palestinians, it's scary, and there is a genocidal talk, human animals, human shields, kill them all, etc. And I am Palestinian myself, and I've been active several years, and I don't think I ever felt that this is beyond the normal. This is a point where our lives are disposable, and there is no value, and we feel like we need to tell people, human beings, we need to live in freedom, in dignity. And of course, we feel the solidarity also of populations, of communities, but living in Berlin is difficult recently. But maybe we talk about this as we continue the conversation. I'm sorry, I kind of feel I'm giving my back to there's. Is it okay if I'm changing the...
Better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I share the same experience. The dimension and the resolution by which we are now facing repression and oppression by the German state as such is scary, and it's frustrating. But in the same time, I must say on an optimistic note that it also brings us together, and the fact that we are allowed to speak here today with you and to share with you our perspective, it's became in a way quite almost a miracle in a democratic state, which is mind-blowing to my understanding. I also want to share with you shortly why I'm here, actually, because maybe it's important to say I was born and raised in Haifa. Does anybody know what is Haifa? Yeah? Could you drop a name of the area? How would you name it? Haifa, right? Some people would name it Israel, some people name it Palestine. I grew up in Haifa. Haifa is famous, is known as a city where Palestinians and Jews live together. So as a young boy, it was already clear to me that the place where I'm living in has more than one name, and it was absolutely fine about me. It's still absolutely fine about me. But I also grew up to understand that my positionality as a Jewish person within this geographical area also prescribes a certain of hegemonic positionality towards all other people who live in the same area who cannot claim Jewish identification. It was important for me, and it's still very much important for me nowadays, to raise a voice against such a system that prescribes injustice by its very essence. But there are also people who are willing, through resistance against such an oppressing system, to sacrifice their life and to kill other people. And it's true also to those who wish to maintain the current state of injustice on both sides, as people like to try to understand the situation there. And to me, it was in a certain time in my life, it was enough. I just wanted to go away. I felt like it is a war zone. And I was looking for a place where I could finally take deeper breath and connect to myself, to make new friendship, to understand who I am in this crazy world. But you can imagine that it was important for me to raise a voice also here in Germany against the oppression system that I saw over there. So you can imagine how surprising I was when I'm arriving in Berlin, in Germany, and sharing my own life experience with individuals who were socialized in the context of Germany. They would often argue I would be anti-Semitic. The German guilt, right? So where does it come from? This understanding that a Jew can so easily be marked as an anti-Semitic, you know? So somebody says correctly, I believe also the same way, it has to do with German guilt. And the way that German politicians deal with this guilt has many forms. We saw it in migration laws, in restitutions, compensations. And there is also this ongoing attempt of siding with the state of Israel, doesn't matter what Israel is doing. For Palestinian people living in Israel, Palestine, this means literally they are deprived of basic human rights. In Germany, the fact that we are not allowed to talk about our life experiences as migrants, but also as Germans, many of us have the German citizenship. This underlines that while in Palestine and Israel, Palestinians are deprived of basic human rights, here in Germany, Palestinians, as such, are deprived of basic civic rights. So let me make it very clear. If we assume that Palestinians and Jews share the same values as human beings, from a German perspective, this is already an argument to frame you as an anti-Semitic. So I'm happy to sit here on the stage with two amazing anti-Semites. Let me also make it clear that probably there is always this argument that you become anti-Semitic through proximity to those who already speak anti-Semitically. So those who sit in the first row have something to inform you. And I believe within 40 minutes, the people in the back will also join our circle.
Yasmeen,
Yeah.
Can you tell some of the story that Udi's talking about from your perspective of the particularities? Well, there are many elements to the story that you raised. One might be from your perspective and your feminist perspective and Palestinian perspective, how you would call the governmental structure in Israel, and we talk about structures of othering and this idea of belonging. For you, where even your own personal and political sense of belonging in Israel, or not?
Yeah. So I grew up in Nazareth, and I also think it's a city that many of you do know where it is. Yeah, famous. So it's not far away from Haifa. And while we speaking behind the scenes, we figured out that we both have another language. We spoke Hebrew in the backstage. And I studied in Tel Aviv University. And I actually left to do my PhD in Canada. And I think in the whole geography of Palestine, Israel, Palestine 48, whatever you want to name it, from the river to the sea, okay? There is one entity that rules, and that is Israel. So the details of the kind of treatment you are getting, it obviously varies between being a citizen of the state but not getting your civic rights, or being living in an open-air prison like in Gaza, or being used as a cheap labor in Bundestans in the West Bank. So it varies, but it all maybe falls within the category that Hannah Arendt calls like the right to have rights. So we don't have the right to have rights, none of us in this whole area between the river and the sea as Palestinians living under the apartheid or the settler colonialism that Israel is enacting upon us for 75 years. So I moved to Germany, Berlin, in a year after many thousands of Syrians fled Syria because of the regime's repression and crimes. Because I was writing my PhD dissertation on the question of how do we live together. I was thinking about all those political movements and instances where we come together and try to bring up something new, to liberate ourselves and those around us. And I thought, okay, I wanted to be closer to this community, and I wanted to belong also. I wanted to feel geographically closer to the area I grew up in, which is the Middle East. So Berlin felt way closer than Canada. But also there is emerging big Arab community, and anyway, Berlin, as you mentioned, it hosts a lot of Palestinians. To my dismay, I was surprised also, although I knew a little bit, how much you do not have the right to speak as a Palestinian in the German context about any pain, grieving, suffering, occupation, nothing that you live through. People get extremely uncomfortable about it, but also different institutions shut down from this discourse. They don't want this brought up, and I think recently it's playing out also in some extreme and horrific instances where police is brutalizing people in the streets, demonstrations are banned, any public speaking will have repercussions. People are thrown out of their jobs, losing funding for their projects, defunded, cancelled, smear campaigns, etc., etc., etc. So it's a moment where I mean, yeah, maybe I'll let you ask more questions because I can't just continue.
No, I think we're going to keep circling in and spiraling into these, and I have to say, part of me thought cynically, oh, it sounds like the United States in certain ways, but it's also very different, and we shouldn't conflate the two as the same experience. And so I want to, Udi, if you can talk about, I had a conversation with someone, my new friend Pam, who is one of the attendees here, who said, you know, one of the reasons I'm here, I came from the United States, is we, as we know, have a deep and profound history of genocide and slavery in the United States, and to put it mildly, have not done a good job. In fact, right now, there's a political, very active political pressure opposing sort of educational recognition of our history. And from her perspective, she was like, well, you know, Germany has this profound history of genocide, but they have done things They have a commitment to a kind of collective memory that, from our perspective, seems extraordinary. And I have to say that as, you know, as a Jewish person, when I walk down the street and I see stumbling stones that tell me about actual human beings who lived in those homes, it's incredibly Jewish human beings who were taken from their homes and put into camps and so forth. It moves me deeply. And so I don't want to. I want to hear a little bit about that history of how that happened and how it's also not a neutral political process. That what Yasmeen you're talking about is deeply related to this decision around what collective history Germany can hold, and in fact, German identity itself. So if you could kind of explain that, we have people from all over who may not understand some of this.
I'm not sure where I should begin the historical inquiry. Like, should we talk about this end of the Second World War, or from there, or where would you direct the question?
Yeah, I suppose we could spend a week on this topic. Can you do the TLDR version? No. If you can just briefly, I know that, for instance, there's a word, yet another very long German word that I can't pronounce, that names the process of coming to terms with the past. Yeah. That has become a linchpin of German national identity. Can you pronounce that word and then explain that? How about that?
So the word is called Wiedergutmachung, Wiedergutmachen, and it literally means what you said. I want to go. Maybe if we talk about anti-Semitism and how Germany try nowadays to combat this, I think this is one aspect of how Germans would feel coming to terms properly with the phenomenon of having Nazi history here. So if we look exactly at how Germany identifies what anti-Semitism is what has been passed by a so-called international alliance that understands itself as IHRA, International Remembrance Holocaust Alliance, which is a coalition of Western European, North American Christian countries and the State of Israel. Right? And this coalition published or passed 2015 what they call a working definition of anti-Semitism. According to this working definition of anti-Semitism, which is accompanied by 11 examples, one of the examples says that if you talk about the State of Israel as a racist project, you are an anti-Semitic, which is a fair argument, but in fact, Israel is a racist state, right? So you cannot name reality by its name. And once you do this, you are becoming part of the problem, actually. Right? 2017, the German government adopts this definition as working definition of anti-Semitism and even extends it to specifies the special relationship between the German state and the Israeli state and how this bond should not be questionable. Right? And since then, to my understanding, things became really terrible, not only for Palestinians, for Muslims in general, but also for Jews, and namely Jews who do not understand the necessity of having a racist state as their own representative. Right? Jews like myself who wish to understand or to explore possibilities of actually living together. And every time we do this, literally every time we do this, the Germany or its representatives, either German politicians, representative of institutions of the state, you name it, they come to us, cut off our budgets, put sanctions on us, exclude us from whatever institution we're at, and reminds us that what we are doing is unacceptable. Literally, Germany is not only not allowing space for such encounters, but it's fighting against such encounters.
Mm-hmm. And if I may add to that, I think that it seems that there is something very threatening to the German state, or maybe the modern German state, in this type of communities coming together. And namely here, I'm talking about Muslim, Jews, Arabs, who are coming in solidarity for Palestine and against state repression here or in Israel, or the Israeli government, I mean. There is something threatening because it's the raison d'être of the German state was to we can make peace with you with only in terms of separation. So we separate the Jews and then we're fine with the state of Israel. But maybe this community reminds them again this group, and again, this group which is in power, which is the elite, which is the politicians or political parties, not necessarily a sentiment that's shared with all Germans, for sure not. It reminds them of the past, so of tragedies that, as all tragedies, could have been avoided. And maybe it shakes the grounds of the future. It shows that of the future and of the present. It shows that there is a possibility of something different that they are not interested in having. They are not interested in this community being empowered, having a voice, and showing that we can come together and show our own way of togetherness, of living together, of creating open space for us. So it's not, I don't know if to call it, if it's cynicism or it's paradoxical. I'm looking for the word where, like, a German would come to a Jew telling him, you are anti-Semite, or telling us that this is racist, when what we are fighting against is actually racism. And then in the recent week, we have been hearing the government clearly talking about expelling or what's the word? Yeah. So revoking the citizenship of immigrants if they do not agree to this line of understanding, both of how they define Semitism and anti-Semitism, how they relate to the state of Israel and its importance to the raison d'être of the German state. Yeah.
There's so much in what you just said and shared, and one thought is that I'd imagine there's a narrative of German identity of repair with the Jews, like a kind of reparations and repair, and so Palestinians don't fit into that narrative. That in fact the experience of Palestinians is deeply unsettling to a narrative of this sort of settled we moved Jews to this other place. I mean, and we know this, that early European support for Zionist colonization Balfour was anti-Semitic, right? Like there was this desire to move Jews elsewhere, and so Palestinians can counter to that sense of self. Is that part of what this dynamic is? That sense of we've done our work and.
Do you want to answer?
How can Palestinians can be imagined as part of Germany, if I may take it in this direction? Mm-hmm. It's a brilliant question. I will even complicate this understanding or the difficulty of this idea even more, because the problem has never been Palestinians. The problem is Germany. It's that Germany that needs us to be in a state of enmity in order to justify its existence. Mm-hmm. But who is excluded from within body of national project? Thank you. who is else excluded from this understanding of this national self, surprisingly, are a lot of Jews. Think about it, that half of the population, half of the Jewish population nowadays in Palestine, Israel, are Jews originated from Muslim Arab countries, right? So what is their role in the justification process of Germany of itself, right? They are completely neglected. If you look on historic school books, there is no mentioning for Jews living in Iraq, in Egypt, in Morocco. Jewish experience is located in Europe. And this is one of the problems that characterizes the idea of Germany. Right? It excludes anything that cannot reassure the legitimacy of Europe as a neutral, natural project.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
John said something yesterday about, he was talking about fascism, but it's also democratic leaders. Anyone, really, is they tell you they care about you, but they don't mean it. Mm. And that is such a deep experience that I hear, that there's this there's a love that is crushing.
Yeah.
So for this to actually, for us as people who live in Berlin, in Germany, to believe that there has been real coming to terms with history and with memory and learning anything, this does not show up in our realities, in our experiences. I'm speaking here both as a Palestinian, but also as an activist and part of these communities, and again, especially the communities that brings together Palestinians and Jews and Muslims and Arabs, and because for us it's like no more killing or no more racism, no more exclusion, but it's not the which we do not see it happening in our lives. We see Germany trying to protect one kind of people. So it's what they think is grievable and matters. But also, as Udi said, they have a very flattened idea of what a Jewish identity is, and how it should act, and how it should belong, and where it should belong, and to whom it should, or with whom it should live. And it's not with the Palestinians. And now, looking at the political discourse that you hear it from Schulz and other personas in the government, where they back Israel, the current fascist government in Israel, the far right government that has settlers who disseminate weapons to individuals in settlements. This is their activity. So they are backed, like Germany is backing this kind of government and allowing it to do whatever it wants now in Gaza. And it's not asking for the bare minimum that if you are watching the news would say, oh, I would expect the German government to say ceasefire, peace. It's not in the discourse. It's really weird, awkward, scary that you look at these governments, Germany, France, United States, the United Kingdom, and there is no talk about ceasefire. So you would think that actually Germany is backing the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and from the northern of Gaza to the south, maybe Sinai or Egypt, and it's as if they cannot imagine, they cannot fathom a future where the two people can live together. And the same thing that happens there is is brought up here, maybe obviously in different scale and in different methods, but there is a suspicion towards this community and crushing to this community that actually shows if we believe in liberty and if we work towards liberty and freedom, then yeah, we can live together. We can find the ways.
Sarah, I don't know what time we have, but we thought later we would love to do some Q&A. So if we can hold 15 minutes for that, that would be amazing. I want to ask you about this question of building power for change and how we define radical, what that means. And is there a way to redefine, is there a need to redefine what radical means? Is there a need to talk about the power of relationality with each other, within our communities, what it takes to be in these struggles for change, what it means to build a world where everyone belongs, all of the tools that are involved. Right now, this fragmenting is happening all over the world in very intense ways. I'm fielding phone calls now from reporters asking about UC Berkeley, where we're from, and the kind of fissures that are developing and the open hostility. I personally have to limit my exposure to Twitter because it's not only increasingly traumatic content, but it looks like a world in which we take one side or another and we have to dehumanize the other side to some degree. There is very little algorithmic support for the world you are describing and that you live in and that we live in. And so what is called upon us as change agents, and you may call yourself an activist, you may be a teacher, you may be a neighbor, doesn't matter. We're all change agents in this work. We're all feeling it in our bodies. So, not to ask you the answer to everything, but Yasmeen, if you could answer that, and then Udi, I would be deeply, I think we'd all be deeply grateful to hear your thoughts.
I'm thinking about the terminology or the word you used, radical. And so my son, who's 8 years old, and we go together to Palestine, but he never lived there. But he speaks Arabic and German. So he asked me, so what do the people in Gaza want? And for a moment, I was like caught unprepared. It's like, obvious, no? So I think radicalism at this moment means for me, for someone who's not supported by the algorithm at all, that our story actually is crushed in the algorithm and everywhere. It's to really deeply, honestly, fully believe that Palestinians do have the right to exist. And exist in freedom, total, full freedom, without confinement, without living somewhere far, without barriers, without the Israelis looking and surveilling our lives and our bodies and our breath, and really believing that we deserve this fully, without remarks, without conditions. And that would mean that people in Gaza can drive to Nazareth, they can drive to Haifa, people in Haifa can drive to Gaza. It's like, I can totally imagine that space open, inclusive, where Jews and Palestinians can live together everywhere. So everyone who can imagine this world, or can maybe start from understanding that Palestinians have the right to exist and as human beings who are free without any constraints from the State of Israel, who, again, as I said in the beginning, the only power that controls that piece of land from the river to the sea, then we understand why Palestinians are calling for freedom, and that's, for me, this is the radical stance. So believing in the Palestinians' right to exist in that land, and again, believing that all of the people who live on that land, both Jews and Palestinians, can and should live together. And that's what everybody should push for, and not more violence or more control and oppression.
I totally second you. I would like to add to that one personal wish. I really wish that my parents will live long enough to experience a state where non-Jews are in power, where Palestinians are in power, and to realize that Palestinians don't treat them the way that their own government now treats Palestinians. And on a macro level, perhaps a theoretical level, I would say, what is radical for me from what my life story taught me is queerness. It's queerness not only in the sense of gender constraints, but also of national constraints, of how you describe the reality that unfolds in front of you, not by being dependent on categories that are already given to you in order to group you into us and them, but to understand how you create a community, a safe space that can start with a group of people and grow bigger and include eventually us all. Because I think in the base of all of it, we're all human beings, and this must be always the starting point for each conversation.
The sense I get in hearing you talk about relationships that you have here in Berlin and this vision resonates with me very deeply. We talk about the illusions, the illusion of the other, and I would invite everyone for whom some of this conversation might be new or even challenging to you, to both talk to us and go on a journey of learning and encounter, and learning and seeing with your own eyes and encountering human beings and understanding histories. And how many times I think those of us, again, who were told as Jews that this thing is for you, it really wasn't, right? This thing that will make you safe, actually, for many of us, hasn't, as we know, from these terrible, terrible weeks. This thing that will make you more human hasn't. And this is something, we can exceptionalize this. Oh, good. All right, I'm getting the sign that it's time for questions. Great. Perfect. Thank you. I couldn't tell. I can't see. We can exceptionalize this, but I do want to note that so many of the dynamics we've been discussing have come up over and over again over the last 2 days. This is not exceptional. There are many people who've had experiences. Every experience is distinct, but having governments promise us safety at the price of othering and other people. Those of us from the United States know this very well. The ways that we have justified extraordinary numbers of deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan and so forth. So I really invite us to actually weave this story into our other stories so we can have a broader vision and broader understanding of the relationships between European colonialism and white supremacy and all of these structures, the military-industrial complex. All of these things are deeply, deeply intertwined. This is not a separate story in that regard. And with that, we are going to open it up for a few minutes of questions. I want to say one thing before we start, which is I know it'll be, for some folks it will be tempting to make a long statement. I will just ask you to be thoughtful about the thing you want to say and get to the question, and do so with great care and love for the people on the stage. I see, yes.
I try to make peace with my guilt as a German, and I want to recommend to use stumble stones and the gift of a stumble stone, because this is really a wonderful thing to get peace just for some minutes, and then try to find a partner, like a Jewish person, to give another stumble stone together. That's what I did. And this was really healing to me.
Thank you. That's a beautiful. Right here in red, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question actually. So you both lived in Berlin. What are your ideas, imaginations for policies Germany could really do to overcome all this guilt and all this wrongdoings and all this separation they're doing regarding the Middle East problem, they always call, but also regarding the migration problem here and the otherings here?
We answer immediately or no?
Yes. Are you over here? Yes. Would you like to respond?
Yeah. So I'll say something quickly and let Udi say. Well, we talked a lot about guilt, and it is very important to put it on the table. But it's not only guilt. There is financial and political interests that ties Germany, UK, France, United States to Israel. So it's important also not to stay in the idealist realm of that's only feelings, because it's not. And the feelings are weaponized. They are used to serve Israel and to serve its policies and to serve the colonial project of Germany, which that's what Israel is doing. So what we can do, I mean, we are not many. We try to do as much as we can. So, I mean, we do the regular stuff that activists do all over the world, demonstrations, petitions, education, coming to talk to people so you can go and talk to others, news, flyers, etc. So that's more or less what we do. I don't know if that was your question.
Yeah, I'm also kind of torn between offering practical advice and between what we heard in the session before, actually, of looking for new ways of governance, because the current situation, the current system that provides us with a certain discourse is just not sufficient enough to offer us true liberation. There are many things we could do at the moment to support each other in this very difficult time. But on the long run, we must reconsider what is the government or the structure that we want to regulate encounters, let's say, for example. I hope it answers your question.
I was asking what the politics can do. I mean,
what the politics?
If you have ideas.
Politicians. What the politicians can do.
I mean, ask for ceasefire? I mean, you know?
Yeah.
End apartheid, ask ceasefire, open the borders, end the siege on Gaza that has been there for 16 years. So many things.
So many things. Yeah.
If Germany wants, this can end.
Just one.
And if United States wants, this can end. Like, have no doubt that Israel cannot do this alone.
Yeah.
Israel cannot do this alone. All the military bases and now the support and money, the Israeli economy would collapse if they are doing this alone. So without all of the support that they are getting from these, especially for governments, but also from others, this project would end tomorrow.
Well, and I'd like to note that the $3.8 billion, I work with an Israeli colleague who is an expert on the money that the United States sends to Israel, and virtually all of that money actually, again, is part of goes to the military-industrial complex. It's not checks handed out to Israel. It's part of our endless wars. So.
Hi everyone. My name is Samia. So I'm a scholar of French working in Germany on the questions of Jews and Muslims in the political debate and sphere. So thank you, Yasmeen. Thank you, Udi. Thank you, Cecily, for this brilliant and great conversation. I thank you for highlighting the complexity of German context. And I would like to rephrase what basically you said. It's like, it's not about us, it's not about Jews, it's not about Israeli, it's not about Palestinian, Muslim, Arab. It's actually about Germans, right? And from there, where do we go? Like, where are the Germans? Where is the well, we're talking about bridging. How do we bridge with Germans? Like, it's like about the definition of being German that the problem is like embedded. So where do you see it going after this crisis that we are in? Like, on the long run, how do we shift narrative, and how do we shift this definition of Europeanness and Germanness, like putting Muslim Arabs on one side and Palestinian Israeli on the other, like this binary poles. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take another? Yeah, let's get a few more comments from the back, folks in the back. We don't want to neglect you. And then we'll take a few more, and then we'll answer that. We'll respond to all of them.
Yeah, thank you all so much for your assumed courage and bravery for sharing your perspective with us. Like, it's very much appreciated. And I guess my question is that since anti-Semitism has unjustly been defined by narratives that are uplifting and compassionate of Palestinian voices, of brown people, of Arab people. My question is, what is the actual real definition of anti-Semitism? Like, what is the current state of anti-Semitism, and how does that manifest in the institutional level in a way that in a definition that is not defined by the current conflict or crisis that we are facing now?
One more comment, and then you can respond.
Thank you for the panel. I wanted to ask, there is a weird support from old anti-Semitic parties in the populist right now for apartheid and genocide, which is super questionable, but no one is questioning this in the mainstream media. Do you think that this is genuine support, or do you think this is just a way to support Israel doing this, but let them just stay away?
Do you want to pause for a moment and take on some of these questions?
About the anti-Semitism.
Sure. Yeah, so maybe really starting with the first question, how surprisingly, maybe just to underline, my problem is not with Germans as such. My concern is with the idea of Germany. Pretty much like my concern is with the idea of masculinity. No one really kind of fit into this, but there is a constant demand to try your best to fit into this idea. So I think this is what we need to address, the idea, the concept of what is Germany. And it's a brilliant question what one can do. I mean, I would love to talk about it more later on, because I think we do have a lot of things to talk about. Thank you. And about the question of anti-Semitism, what is the definition? It's a fair question. It's an important question, because the phenomenon of anti-Semitism is real and is dangerous. anti-Semitism, from my understanding, my experience, is a form of racism. And like any other form of racism, this must be condemned and, how do you say, to dismantle, right? Is how you say?
Yeah.
Dismantle. Thank you. Yeah. And I think in the end, what we witness, the policy of Germany towards Israel, is by itself anti-Semitic. Is the understanding that Jews speak in one voice, that they are not able to make decisions from themselves, like in my case. Right? Is the understanding that after exterminating the entire Jewish population of Germany, the few who made it to revive what Germany understands as Jewish life in today's Germany, that Germany invests so much effort in regulating who is within and who is without, who is a normative Jew and who is a radical, I don't know how you name it, a Jew that their perspective is not only marginalized but also endangers the very idea of Germany. And the situation, and this inclusion of certain Jewish voices, it's not surprising that those certain Jewish voices who are included within the legitimacy of general discourse are exactly those voices who allow Nazi Germans nowadays to express their hatreds toward Muslims in general by saying, look, we are not anti-Semitic, we are not anti-migrants, look, we have nothing against Jews. It's just that those Jews who are willing to side with right extremist Germans, and apologies, but to me, right extremist German is every political party who understands that the definition of anti-Semitism should be understood also as understanding the state of Israel as racist, which includes all political parties nowadays in Germany. Yeah. I forgot what is the point, but I think maybe this is also something you should take with you. Yeah.
Maybe let's take more. I agree with him.
Let's
There's
take, okay.
to add.
In the back, are there any... over here? Oh, all right. One in the back, yeah?
Hello. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask a quick question back to your point, Cecile, about relationality and building power. And so you've mentioned in the panel the highly racialized nature of censorship, surveillance, and shutting down pro-Palestinian solidarity. So my question for you is, what would you like people with power and privilege to do, and not in an abstract sense, but in an immediate sense, right? To the organizers of this conference, to the people in this room, what can we do in the immediate, especially those of us who don't live in Germany, especially those of us who do live in Germany but have power, who won't be censored, who won't suffer the same precarity as people that have spoke out in pro-Palestinian solidarity? What can we do in the immediate sense, and what can those of us who do who won't be touched by the censorship do? As in, what will we do today and tomorrow?
Thank you. We're going to get one more. Yes, please.
Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. Thank you so much for such a thoughtful conversation. I had a question about whether or not it's been helpful to your activism, the both of you, to name Zionism specifically as an issue versus the state of Israel. And and when I say Zionism, I'm speaking from my understanding of it being modern political Zionism as a Jew supremacist, ethno-state, settler colonial ideology. And the context for my question is, I work in the pro-democracy space in the US, and I've seen a massive amount of cognitive dissonance when it comes to some of my allies in that space who, would never accept the idea of an ethno-state, or would balk at many of the laws in Israel that discriminate from a civil rights and liberties perspective. But for some reason, any idea of kind of critiquing Zionism is just seen as like beyond the pale. And I'm sure you know the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, have done a massive amount of campaigning to equate anti-Semitism specifically with anti-Zionism. So yeah, just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
And Ashley, one person up in the front has had her hand raised for a bit, right here.
Thank you. I began listening to the panel with tears, so I appreciate creating that space. The question is not that well formulated, but I've been grappling a lot in the last few weeks and years around nationalism. So this question of what defines a German is actually not of interest to me, but a lot of the, back to the former panel of reconstructing our notion of governance, we're talking about this issue a lot around nationalism and flag waving. And as a Jew, that's deeply disturbing to me. As an American, I don't wave an American flag. And so I wonder how you think about the conflation of this, of freedom and liberty with nationalism.
Thank you. Yasmeen, do you have some thoughts to any of the questions?
Yeah, so I'll start from the question about what can be done, and as I said in the beginning, we are meeting here, and again, thank you for this opportunity where there is a genocide happening in Gaza, and if you do follow the Israeli media, and I do because I do speak Hebrew, it's scary to what they are calling for. There are big placards, they are called, the ones in the streets. They are in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, with one word, revenge. So because he mentioned his parents, I wish that my father, who gone through the Nakba in 1948, he does not see another one. But clearly this is what Israelis, like Israeli media and government is calling for, and a lot of the public as well. So my father was born in Nazareth in 1941. His birth certificate says Nazareth, Palestine. And I wish that he does not live to see another group, maybe a million of Palestinians being expelled outside of Palestine and maybe possibly Egypt. So what can you do? I think everybody has power despite the privileges, and anything you can do would help, especially pressuring the politicians your governments, petitioning, going to demonstrations. Mass mobilizing at this moment is really key. Call for ceasefire, ending the genocide, stopping this crime from continuing, and asking for the end of the occupation, the end of the apartheid. It's still possible for the two people to live together. I don't know if this is going to be the case in 10 years.
We have to wrap.
Yes.
So,
do you want to talk about? There was a question about Zionism and Israel, and I don't know if I did get the idea that it's easier in certain contexts, maybe the American, to actually criticize Israel than criticize Zionism. That's the gist of that question.
Yeah. And I would just briefly.
Just to make clear, Zionism is such a rich philosophy by itself. The manifestation of the State of Israel is a very specific way of how Zionism could be imagined, and unfortunately it's a very dangerous form of Zionism. So when people nowadays speak against Zionism, to my understanding, they speak against the Zionism as manifested in the State of Israel. So I think for me it's merely synonyms at the moment, Zionism and the State of Israel.
Yeah.
Our time is up. Thank you so very much. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.